Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the January 6th, 2021. I have to get that out. 2021 Board of Education meeting. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the republic
to the republic which it stands,
one nation under God,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we did not meet in executive session, so I'm going to skip that and move right up to our open remarks. I want to welcome everybody to our first board meeting of 2021. How good it feels to actually say that, 2021. I hope everybody enjoyed a happy and a healthy school vacation and got some rest and some much needed R&R. Started out the year feeling super hopeful, and I still remain very hopeful that we will have a great year ahead, even though we may have to be patient. But I do want to mention some of the events or my thoughts about the events of today, just briefly. Obviously, has deflated some of the hope that we had all felt just last week when we rung in the new year. So as a native Washingtonian and obviously as an American, my heart is really aching at this moment after witnessing what occurred in the nation's capital today and what unfolded this afternoon. Especially for me, I remember fifth grade trips to the Capitol steps. I think we took a picture with Joe Biden because our classmate's father worked with him. And, I just remember that being such a sort of shining symbol of democracy growing up in the Washington area, and still to this day when I go visit my family and I step out of Union Station, it's the first thing I see. So while the events of today attempted to threaten our democracy, I really hope that this is a turning point for our nation to heal, to move forward, to listen, and to work together again. And I feel really strongly about this. Our children are watching. So I just wanted to briefly say that. Other than that, I have no other comments. I just wanted to remind anybody who wishes to make public comment that by 8:15 they'll need to email me at jddomenico@pelhamschools.org. Please send an email to me, brief comments if possible, and state your name and your Pelham mailing address. And I will leave it there. This brings us to section 3, which is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes of December 16th, 2020?
So
So moved. Second.
Thanks, Vinny. Thanks, Jess. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, this brings us to section 4, which is administrative and committee reports. 4.1 is the superintendent's report.
Good evening, everyone. And I do want to begin tonight as well, acknowledging what is going on really in our country that is just really been mind-blowing. So I just want to read the message that I sent out to our parents tonight, and certainly send a message to our staff. I want to thank Dr. Thompson for jumping in to send our teachers resources, a wealth of resources even tonight, to help them prepare as we plan to come into school tomorrow, because as Jessica said, our children are watching. We're watching, and we're grappling with how to deal with what we're seeing, and they're going to be grappling even harder, I believe. So the letter that I sent out tonight, just to reiterate, the events that occurred in Washington today are truly mind-boggling. American citizens have the right to protest peacefully, but the violence, chaos, and lawless behavior that occurred today, serving to disrupt the democratic process, must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. As a school district, we strive to teach our students to be respectful, law-abiding citizens who are prepared to engage in civil discourse and participate in our democracy. Storming of the U.S. Capitol and intentionally disrupting the sacred tradition of a peaceful transfer of power are in stark contrast to those ideals. While we recognize the images on the news will be difficult for many to absorb and will elicit questions from our students trying to make sense of what's happening, please know that our faculty, school counselors, and clinicians are preparing to speak with students as necessary. I would also like to share 2 resources, and those are available in the email that was issued just a few minutes ago, to help parents have some of these difficult conversations. We definitely live in difficult times. The raging pandemic continues to rage, and we continue to have a deeply divided political landscape. But we cannot let the violence, chaos, and disrespect for one another and democratic process define who we are as a country. We are far better than this, and I know our community of Pelham can be an example to the rest of the world of that. And I do remain hopeful that our best days are yet ahead, as Jessica does as well. So we will also be meeting with the administrative team first thing in the morning, just to be sure that we've got everything in place to help navigate through the day and the days ahead, as this is something that none of us have ever experienced again in our lifetime. So we will forge forward together and come through on the other side of this, as Jessica said, hopefully finding some healing, some unity, and really ideally strengthening our democracy and strengthening those things that bind us together as a country. I do want to move on to just a couple brief updates for the district. Just some, believe it or not, it's that time of year where we begin a lot of our transition meetings, already thinking about the 21-22 school year. Budgeting's beginning, scheduling is beginning, and transition meetings with parents and students are beginning. So last night was the high school hosted a virtual transition night for students and parents for next year's incoming 9th grade class to help them learn about the high school. Tomorrow night, the counseling department will be hosting a virtual college night for 11th graders. Many of these types of events are scheduled over the next few months. And even though while they look a little different this year, they're definitely will continue to be a major source of information for students and families. So I encourage you to keep checking the calendar. Some dates have fluctuated and moved throughout the fall and may continue to move, but Alex works with the building principals to keep that detailed district calendar up to date. So please do check back to the website and the calendar on a regular basis to make sure that you're up to date on those important transition evenings and events. Another exciting thing that's happened at our high school, and I have to say this is a first in my entire career, we had a student, Aiden Levy, nominated as a presidential scholar. He is senior. Aiden Levy was one of just 25 students nominated by the entire state education department, from the entire state of New York, nominated by the education department for the Presidential Scholar Program. It's an extremely prestigious honor, and we're very thankful to our representatives in Albany for their help with this process. Thanks especially to Assemblywoman Paulin, who submitted Aiden's name on behalf of her region, and we're just so proud of that, and could not be happier for Aiden, for his family, in the way that he's represented his school. So congratulations to Aiden. Just being nominated at this level is truly an honor. I also want to congratulate Stock and Buskins for their incredible virtual performance of Diary of Anne Frank. Such unique filming of that. I was so impressed. Obviously, producing theater right now is extremely challenging, but directors Tom Beck and Neil Schleifer did once again work their magic, and the entire cast were up to the challenge. So we're excited. They just announced their spring musical, Working, I believe is the title. Not one I'm personally familiar with, so I'm looking forward to expanding my theater background. But exciting, looking ahead to that musical this spring. Jim will probably touch on the next item, our Prospect Hill construction. So I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder, as I always tend to do. But we are close to starting our site preparation for Prospect Hill. Letters went out to the community neighbors about that over the holiday break. As you might remember, it's part of the 2018 bond, and we're excited to finally be getting to these initial stages of some of these remaining projects. And of course, that will be the project that will reconfigure the main entrance, provide ADA accessibility to the building, bathrooms, as well as provide us some additional meeting and classroom space, which is above and beyond what was planned in the original scope. But it has been amazing to work through the process and will be within the original budget. So we're very excited to get that project up and running. And finally, another maybe not quite as exciting as of a facility upgrade, but one that we're equally as proud of. I was honored to virtually attend the ribbon cutting of the new Siwanoy Library. And it's really not just a library, it's really going to be a creative learning space for students. That was just before the recess. The library, for those of you who know the building, used to be on the third floor or on the top floor. It's hard to tell which floor when it's a split level with 5 levels. Top floor. It was moved from that area down to what has been the Makerspace Imagination Station for the last couple of years. Um, and it was outfitted with innovative and flexible furniture, as well as the books and resources from the library having been brought down and incorporated. Um, that approach is consistent with what had been done at Colonial and Prospect in the Middle Hill as far as combining the innovative flexible furniture location with the libraries. And of course, many thanks go to the PEF who made this project possible. You recall they gave us the most significant grant that they had ever issued to move our flexible and innovative furnishings project forward. And so this was a major uplift, and we'll hopefully be featuring the library projects in an upcoming newsletter or focus as we've gotten the furniture and the upgrades done to almost all the libraries at this point. So we're really excited to be opening that space, even though I know use of space is somewhat different this year. Still, those projects have moved ahead. And I want to personally thank Dr. Garcia, John Sabalos, Dr. Callahan, Dr. Thompson, and the many teachers, administrators, and parents who served on our innovation committee, who worked on so hard on bringing the details of those projects to be, and then of course, which resulted in the grant, and thanks to the PEF for their continued support. So it's exciting to me that despite the other challenges that we are dealing with, progress continues and our facilities continue to be upgraded. So when the time comes that all of our students are back, we are going to have even more for them to come back to, which is very exciting. That ends the kind of the news updates. What I did want to do at this time, though, was to take the opportunity to share the results from the thought exchange that we put out recently. So I'm going to share my screen and pull that up for you now, and just take a few minutes to go through the feedback that we received. I'm sure the board remembers it was back in October, November. We had put out a thought exchange to staff and to parents to get an initial assessment of how things were going with the hybrid model. And at that time, we said that we made a couple adjustments and came back and said that we would again survey folks in November. So end of November, beginning December, we were able to launch these exchanges and wanted to just briefly share those results with you now. So I'm going to begin with the staff exchange. The question was slightly different than the first thought exchange, because now we're 4 months into the project, or into school in the hybrid model. So we really wanted to hear from our staff, what are some additional supports needed now that they're 4 months into the school year. I know we did tremendous amount of planning, and I think I've said it before, we've overplanned in some areas, and thankfully better to be overplanned than under, but we've learned a lot about what works, how it works, and what's going well and what we might need to do some work on. So we had, out of 400 staff, almost 200 participants. They were participants from across all schools, which is always great to have that broad perspective. And again, you see predominantly instructional staff. Thankfully, our support staff also participated as well, and a few administrators. I always like to start with the word clouds, and with the word clouds, certainly take the words that are most often used in the thoughts. So it's a great way to identify some themes that may rise to the surface. And really, if you look at the center, you see the ones that most stood out. And the colors tend to have correlation. So if things are of similar colors, they're generally considered within the system as similar themed. So Wednesday planning time, you can see those in the center that are all of the same color. Significant theme around that. Concern for health, concern for morale, concern for families, their own families, as well as families of students. And then a number of other themes that you can see surfacing there. So that's always kind of just a nice quick snapshot to give us a preview of what is to come. In looking at some of the key thoughts, and we're going to go more into detail in these as we go to the themes, but some of the definite key thoughts that rose to the absolute top, the ability to work from home when students are fully remote, which has been somewhat of an ongoing conversation. Again, that came up many times, so we're going to see that on the next slide. And of course, stress continues to come up. I think that came up as a major theme last time around. That's something that our building administrators in particular and our directors and supervisors have been attending to. But I think the reality is we all recognize this is a very stressful way to try to conduct school, try to conduct learning for so many reasons. And we talk a lot about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this environment has definitely brought us all back to some of those basics of safety, belonging, and needing to have some foundational pieces in place in order for people to function at higher levels where we need them to function to be effective as teachers and effective as students. So to go more into detail, these were the major themes that the comments broke down into. The concept of pause around the holidays, given the way that the virus was spreading, potential for infection, potential for quarantine, concern about if families traveled over the break or what exposures may have happened over the break, whether it was travel or whether it was just family gatherings. So significant concern there. Again, that discussion of the ability to work from home when the schools are fully remote. Um, that was in many ways related to health as well. The idea of the half day Wednesdays and how incredibly valuable that has been to our teachers as they are preparing their work and still reinventing and crafting their curriculum and their lessons on a daily basis. And other themes related to questions, frustrations around contact tracing, stress, communication, heat within the buildings now that we're into the winter months, parent conferences. I think there's a lot of positive comments that are from our faculty, as well as some parents that had communicated to us separately about how parent conferences went this year. Some information, themes around administrative support and staff health. So the biggest themes, I just wanted to highlight the top three really in each of these exchanges. The holiday pause. This was a major request from our staff, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we spent a lot of time at our last board meeting in a discussion about this, and I do think it was a wise decision, and that is currently we are in that pause right now. And what that has done is that has allowed us to have time to assess cases that occurred over the break that are occurring now, and as we discussed last time, for the folks who may have been with others outside of their household on the holidays, it's allowing the time for that incubation period to show itself. So Julia has been in contact with principals throughout the week and will continue to do that as we are starting to log the numbers of cases, exposures, or quarantines that are still out there. All those issues still exist. And our hope is that with this pause, and certainly now with the new quarantine standards of only a 10-day quarantine, the hope is that we should basically be in the clear, ideally from the Christmas holiday in particular, by the time we get to next week. That's our hope, fingers crossed. And we put it in an email earlier in this week, and we may be issuing another email before the end of the week. We really strongly need for parents to communicate to us any quarantine or positive cases amongst their children that are occurred over the break or occurring now. We really just need that information for our planning, for reporting, for the state portal. And that's really going to help us to make sure our goal is to start the year healthy. We need everyone to come healthy, adhere to the health agreement the family signed at the beginning of the year. Staff, same thing, do not come to school if you are sick, showing empty symptoms. We need to make sure that everyone comes to school healthy so that we can get off to a solid and a consistent start to the school year. Second theme had to do with working from home. This comes from most districts. In many cases, in an ideal world, we would have staff coming into the building even when students are remote, because it does provide a professional environment, solid internet, all of the teachers' resources, their colleagues, their administrative support, their clerical support, technology support are all here in the school. So ideally, having our staff in the building has been our expectation, and we feel would provide the best support for teachers. But again, as we look at how the virus is really, the transmission is increasing exponentially, that does present an issue of The more we bring people together, the more chances we may increase spread. So especially for those folks who have health concerns, um, we want to allow that flexibility. And as well, one of the factors I know that folks are very aware of, many schools like us were opening and closing, shifting in and out of remote, which caused childcare issues for some children. So again, that's something that we're all trying to balance, yet still being able to provide our students in Pelham a consistent and high quality education. So in seeing the feedback that came here and speaking with the union and the administrative team, we feel it's appropriate at this time to grant teachers that flexibility to use their judgment, and if they can teach successfully and with high quality from home, and those times when our students in the schools are fully remote, we are going to be allowing that going forward. And then finally, this is again another one that is significant, has been from the beginning a significant assistance to our teachers. You remember from our prior conversations, they really have articulated how it feels like teaching to three different audiences, because in many ways they are teaching to three different audiences: the students in front of them in the classroom, the cohorted students who are on their remote days, as well as some students who are fully remote. And the number of fully remote students has increased significantly as we headed towards the holidays because of, again, the spread of the disease, and folks were making decisions for their families, for health and safety. And we respected those decisions and worked collaboratively and flexibly. We're hoping that some of those students do come back into the schools once we get through the holiday season. But we also, again, recognize the virus is continuing to spread. So having those three different audiences continues to be an issue for teachers. When we shift to fully remote, that actually we've gotten feedback that's been, in many ways, parents have told us, and even teachers, actually a much, in some ways, better educational experience, because it's no longer three audiences, it's one audience. The children are all together, and they're all together on the screen. There's one interacting vehicle for the teacher through the Google Meet. Yet, even though it's one audience, it still requires even a different retooling of curriculum and instruction approaches, because you are full virtual versus having those different audiences. So that's why the Wednesday afternoons have been critical for them from the beginning and remain critical. There's no way that anyone could have rewritten and redesigned their entire curriculum in the course of a summer. And again, not knowing the variability of the year, again, that's just an impossibility to think that that was the case. So our teachers are continuing to do a tremendous job. The hours that they're putting in are still continue to be far above and beyond after school and evenings, what they've even had to do in the past. So they've been incredibly appreciative and have really continued to need those afternoons. Additionally, our administrators have been able to tap into some of that time for many other professional responsibilities. CSE meetings are happening there, MTSS meetings, data meetings, and even potential, even opportunities for some grade level check-ins, professional development opportunities. So those afternoons are used very thoroughly and consistently. So we do strongly recommend that we're continue with those Wednesday afternoons for our teachers. That moves us into the family exchange. We're trying to get a similar question with now that we're 4 months into things, and we're seeing shifting back and forth, and we've gone back and forth between hybrid and remote learning. How do we best support students and parents? So 314 participants, not as many as last time, but still some really great thoughts. And again, this survey was, a thought exchange was sent only to our elementary levels. We recognized from the last thought exchange that we needed to separate out secondary from elementary. In secondary, we felt like we had kind of the model had hit the mark a little bit better. So we wanted to follow up with our elementary parents, and there's a nice balance from all 4 schools. And again, we've similar numbers to what we saw before, about 80 to 20%, those with IEPs and those without. So again, here's our snapshot preview. And it's pretty obvious to see that Wednesday is another theme here. But again, it would probably be no surprise that Wednesday is a different view on Wednesday. Hours, start time, instruction, those are some of the big pieces that we're going to continue to see as we look into the themes. Top thoughts that came through: had to do with the length of the school day, Wednesdays, continuing support for working parents, and the idea of continuing to offer as much in-person school as is safe. And that came up in a lot of different ways. Many, whether it was having students in school all 5 days, having all students back now, having all students back eventually, and really most importantly, having a plan to get all students back. So themes more specifically had to do again with the length of day, whether that was Wednesday or the length of the day itself. This one didn't show up in the word exchange, but it definitely came up as a second strongest theme, science and social studies. That folks were really strongly looking for science and social studies to be, in some cases, returned to the curriculum. What I'm going to ask Dr. Garcia in a few minutes to just mention that it has been returned to the curriculum. Clearly, we need to talk some more about that. But we were excited to see that as what we thought, our community does value science and social studies. Events like are happening today show us all the more why we can't not continue to look at civics and social studies, and living through a pandemic reinforced for us every day the value of understanding science and scientific principles. So we're just happy to be reinforced that that is something that our community continues to value and want. And then working parents, again, that has been one of our struggles, to be honest, from the spring. I think we did a better job in the fall, but that continues to be an area of struggle for elementary parents in particular. There was a lot of overlap between that and maximizing the in-person days, which just makes sense. If students are in school more, it definitely helps to facilitate the stresses that working parents are dealing with. So there's a lot of overlap there. So with regards to length of day, I guess this really is the challenge, and maybe is once again a clear illustration of the ways that so much about the hybrid model is really competing interests, and really difficult to find ways that really can satisfy all needs. Many parents do want to see those Wednesdays go back to being full days. As I articulated before, at this point in time, I really strongly believe that our teachers continue to need that time for planning, for coordinating their professional responsibilities, and for collaborating. Without that time, they will not be able to deliver the instruction effectively because they won't be able to design it effectively. So please know that that time is being valuably used. We recognize what a sacrifice that is, but we would not stand behind it if we didn't know how valuable that was and how effectively that is being used. Length of the day, school day should go back to a regular day. Just wanted to touch on the reasons why it's not currently first. And you may recall, part of when we were planning the schedule, there was a number of issues that we took into account. And part of that was the need for arrival and dismissal we knew was going to be different because it needed to be staggered. We needed to allow, again, planning time for teachers. But the other piece that you may not remember, we do have office hours both in the morning and in the afternoon for the elementary teachers. And that was, certainly for support for any student, but also with an eye towards our students who are full virtual. We recognize those students who are full virtual don't have any opportunity for direct interaction with the teacher in the classroom. So we knew that they were going to need additional small group, one-on-one extra opportunities for interaction. So that's why those time slots are there at the beginning and the end of school. So there is still some need for that because I said our numbers of virtual students have increased through the holidays. But we've already spent a few hours looking through this data with our administrative team, and we're having follow-up meetings with them later this week and in coming weeks to look at, given the feedback, the more specific details than we're looking at tonight, but is there any time that we can recapture within that day, or time that can be used more effectively, so that there's an increased learning time for our students. So that is something that we're going to start to look at. I can't give you an answer right now what that might look like, but I do want to assure you that we are looking at that. And again, lessons learned after 4 months, there probably are some tweaks that we can make to try to maximize what there is and see if there's even more time to be gained somewhere. Theme number 2 was social studies and science, bring back science. The shorter day does make it tougher. I will recognize that is just a logistical reality, an agreement that students need to learn science and social studies. I would ask at this time, Dr. Garcia, could you just very briefly remind the board and share with our parents what is the expectation now and the work that's been done to help teachers incorporate that into their curriculum? Dr. Garcia? Good, I thought it was just me. You know, if you want to log out and then I'll go on to the next slide. If you want to log out and come back, and we'll see if that works. Great. Okay, so we'll come back to that. And then the third theme, again, as I mentioned, was working parents. So parents, you know, continuing to struggle with supporting their students, especially as they're managing, you know, whether it's childcare and going out to work and struggling with coverage when we shift to remote, or whether it's working from home and trying to support their children who are not as independent at the younger ages as they should be. So again, this is another area that we're going to be exploring with the principals. Are there tweaks and things that we can do differently that may help better support working parents? Tied with this, though, I think is the slide that, or the theme that didn't make the top three. It was the fourth one, but I mentioned earlier, I think very much related. The idea of bringing back more, maximizing the in-person opportunities, and with an eye towards eventually bringing more students back. I would say certainly now, with the virus being what it is, this is not the moment. It's not the time for us to start bringing back students. What I think it is the time to be planning for that. So again, as we continue to meet with the K-5 team in the next coming weeks, we're going to be specifically tackling that question as well. What would it look like for us to move towards bringing more and more students back? You know, I'll be idealistic by the end of this school year if possible, maybe not till September, but what would be those milestones and what would be our approach to bringing more students back in when it is safe? And then once we've got those educational approach and milestones figured out, then I think that's where we're going to turn toward, and I may have mentioned in our last meeting, towards some of the medical resources in our community to find out what are those medical milestones that make it safe to start increasing density. Right now, our Department of Health guidelines haven't changed, so that's what we're still beholden to, but we know that vaccines are beginning to roll out. Thankfully, we even just found out today, our school nurses, our speech pathologists, and our OTs are going to be getting their vaccinations this week, which is tremendous. So we know that that's going to start rolling out. So as that rolls out, that's going to impact the context in which we can start to implement those plans. So I'm going to check back and see if Dr. Garcia is
Yes, can you hear me now?
on. Yes, we can hear you now.
You know, it's so sad because we just changed our internet and cable provider. So I was hoping that this type of thing wouldn't happen again. But anyway, I know that Dr. Champ alluded to this. So at the outset of the pandemic and looking at the curriculum for this year, you know, there was a major emphasis on one major area, especially, which was social emotional learning for children, and ease them back into the classroom and into the learning environment, in person, also virtual. Of course, there was also a lot of effort to make sure that we continue progress with literacy, reading, and mathematics. So as the fall progressed, you know, we've been talking about making sure that we reintegrate more science social studies. So I'll just briefly talk about science. So this fall, Dr. Callahan commenced a process to determine what core concepts in science we wanted to teach for the remainder of the year. He met with the STEAM coaches that we have. We surveyed the teachers, looked at what we thought was the most important concepts. We also looked at the different experiences that we have in the curriculum, which is based on the Science 21 curriculum, which is based on the framework of the science, next generation science standards in New York State. We also looked at what type of digital resources we can integrate, like Mystery Science and Generation Genius for the K-5 group. So the culmination of that work was really putting together a pretty comprehensive online resource for our teachers, which really spells out the core curriculum for this school year. It was important also that our approach embeds the new standards, focused on development of not just covering a large amount of material, but also about the skills of reasoning and asking questions, collecting evidence, and reflecting on something that on some things that we emphasize. And it's also rooted in our Pelham inquiry cycle. So this was also translated into the report card that we have this year during the pandemic, which are bridges between the old report card and the new report card. But then Dr. Callahan and the teachers really created a scope and sequence for our science program this year. And they did a really great job of putting that together for direct online lessons and resources for our teachers to implement. With social studies, it's very similar. And science and social studies will be taught every other week for at least 60 minutes in K-5. In social studies, Dr. Maria Thompson led this effort. Each grade level was redesigned by the 4 curriculum coaches and also Dr. Thompson. The pacing was adjusted to fit the new timeline while upholding the new standards. The framework for social studies was released in 2017. Some lessons were condensed, some were eliminated, but it was important to maintain at least 3 units for each grade level based on how vitally important they are to student understanding of key concepts with the state curriculum. The themes and the concepts which were really outlined and emphasized, we thought were the ones that were most important for the students to progress with this year. Performance-based assessments were also adjusted. Every grade level will assess all of the required social studies skills and practices. And again, Dr. Thompson, just like with Dr. Callahan, created a really wonderful social studies hub online for the teachers for guidance and for direction in terms of how to implement the curriculum this year. So we are very excited about it. It may have been about a month delayed or so in terms of how we scoped out this curriculum this year. Again, just getting kids adjusted. But as Dr. Champ said at the beginning of the meeting, this year, of course, just like any year, but with the outset of the pandemic, science is so critical for us, and making sure the kids have a keen understanding of really what's happening, but what's going on in the environment, in their body, and so forth in the science curriculum. Same thing in social studies, and we don't need to talk about even mentioning the events of today, but even going back to the election and just about citizenship and about the value of democracy and how this nation was developed and formed, and our relationship with other countries and our place in this world are just as equally as important, in my opinion, as math and ELA as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, and that really brings us to the end of the presentation. This really outlines what I've mentioned throughout. So adjustments that we've made in light of the teachers' feedback, and where we're heading as far as relative to the parent feedback as well. So we're hoping to come back to you in the next month or so with some follow up on the ways that as we continue to look at the current K-5 model, and as we start to plan towards returning more students to school when it is safe to do so. We look forward to bringing that information back to you. And with that, I'm going to stop presenting and open it up for questions.
Does anybody have any questions?
I had a question. It may be a little bit off topic, but there's been a lot of vaccine hesitancy, even among healthcare workers, astonishingly. What's the sense of that among our teaching staff and our support staff?
I don't know, Julia, if you've got some insight on that. We haven't polled any, haven't done anything formal to assess. I think it's probably all over the map would be my guess, like it is with a lot of folks. Julia, did you have any thoughts to share on that?
Not so much in terms of teachers. I do know that when I sent out that email this morning, as soon as we received it, regarding the availability to our nurses and our speech and OT providers, many of them actually emailed me right away. They went on, they told me that they were get a time slot because first come, first serve, and it was really only for the next 3 days. And so I know several of them have already signed on. I don't know if every single person has, but they all have the information. So I know many have.
And there's a lot of news stories out there about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's not like it's anything we have to inform people about, but in news stories I've heard, from the hospitals in New York City, those hospitals which spent time beforehand helping educate their staff had a much better success rate at getting their staff to get the vaccine. And those that kind of assumed everybody would fall into line were shocked when they didn't. And I think maybe some polling and some gentle education along those lines. It might be good to know where we might be on that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I know that there's, legal is, they're assessing, their position on whether districts can require or not. NICET is certainly staking their position as well. I think, to be honest, I think there is more favorability from the legal perspective on being able to require, and because I think people see it as a function of the work environment. In order for us to open schools, we need people vaccinated. So I think those are
I'm not
important
advocating for
questions.
requiring it. I'm just
No.
to-
But I'm just saying, I think those are what you raise are all important questions that we need to be proactive about.
Sorry, that's a little bit off topic, but I heard somebody.
That's
So.
okay.
Cheryl, I had a
I have
question as
one.
well.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Jess.
Leah, and then Jen.
Yeah. Go ahead, Leah.
So I was just wondering whether conversations have been had or could be had regarding maybe thinking of some enrichment activities for elementary students during those half-day Wednesdays, maybe even considering involving the PTAs or rec department in designing some activities that could even have a science or social studies component, since those are the concerns that parents seem to be having. I recognize and am supportive of the need for the professional development, but I also really hear the parents saying that that half day is very long and difficult when it's every week.
Yeah. So that's something that I think, and I appreciate that question and that suggestion as well, because I think that could be a nice way to address numerous of those concerns in a really positive and constructive way. So Dr. Garcia and I are going to broach that idea with the administrative team and see, if they feel like there might be some openness to opportunities there. I think a couple of the challenges we face are, space and cohorts. I think our PTAs are aware of this, but for folks who may not be, we've been really sticking firmly to our cohorted groups, especially at the elementary, where we've asked our PTAs if they're doing a school event on property that they need to stick within the cohorts that we've established. So we would need to take a look at that and see, are there logistics that would make that prohibitive? Maybe we look at a virtual option, at least as a starting point. Or the other issue is our teachers. You may have seen it in the teacher feedback. They're struggling for their own space right now because we're having specials come into the classroom and lunches in the classroom. Teachers have nowhere to plan. So that would be just another piece that we'd have to take a look at. But where there's problems, there's usually solutions. So we're going to begin that conversation because I think you're right. I think there's been requests for enrichment. There's certainly, as we saw, a request for more math or more science and social studies. And that time is time that, again, as you said, looking for more learning for students. So it's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Leah. Also, so kind of along those lines, but I guess I know you mentioned that maximizing in person, like bringing students back, that's a way off, and we're planning for that phase. But I didn't catch, or maybe I didn't know if you said if there was when that length of day changes might be considered or rolled out. Would that be before the bringing students back at more time, or
That's
are
another
they
conversation.
related?
Yeah, I don't think those are necessarily related because you're not
Mhm.
adding to the density
Right.
of the day. So we're going to be exploring opportunities for that as well. I think the challenge, I mean, the one of the big things to me is I would want to know first how many students are accessing those office hours.
Right.
You know, because that is a key piece of the beginning and end of the day. You know, I honestly don't know the answer to that question. So that's one of the pieces of information we're going to be starting conversation with the administrators. I don't know, Dr. Garcia, if there's anything you wanted to add to this discussion. I know a lot of this is upcoming discussion, but
Yeah.
I think we can look at those two issues somewhat differently, I think.
Yeah, I know that Cheryl and I talked about this right after the break, and you know, I mean, she expressed all the questions, concerns, the wonderings as well, and that's something we're going to definitely talk about tomorrow, actually, with the administrators, the principals, and then the PTAs are definitely a resource. I know they have a lot of after-school programs, which traditionally they've done. You know, are there ways that virtually experiences can happen for kids during those Wednesday afternoons? I think those are things that should be explored as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and the other concern that reminded me when we did originally design the abbreviated schedule, was concern about screen time for students at home. So that's another piece we want to again have those conversations and see are there ways that we can recapture some time, still not overdo on screen time, still allow for the needs of the virtual students to be met, but maybe there's ways to recapture more time uh, for students who are in person. Yeah. So go ahead, Vinny. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. And I apologize if we discussed this in the past and I'm just having Alzheimer's, but for the students that are fully virtual and have decided to go fully virtual, once we start coming into a fuller day, a 5-day week, will they have an opportunity to come back into that, or are they shut out of that going forward?
Oh no, they definitely will have the opportunity to come back. And we've been originally we did ask for a commitment of the first marking period, first trimester. We've passed that point at all levels, and to be honest, we've been really very flexible as we headed towards the holidays and as the virus has continued to spread. More and more parents have wanted to move to full virtual. Also, I should say there have been parents who selected full virtual first, but their children really struggled and they've asked to start coming back. So again, our principals have been working hand in hand with parents to try to do what's best for the child in the moment. So we definitely would welcome full virtual children back into hybrid, definitely at this point. So they would just need to speak to their building principal.
Thanks.
I think that has been the beauty of our model, correct? That, if parents and students change their mind at any time, it's sort of fluid where they could come back because there was a seat waiting for them versus finding another student to replace their spot.
Yeah, I will say that has added stress to the teachers.
Yeah.
Because, because if they expect 12 students in class that day and 7 show up because 5, needed to be home for whatever reasons, again, that's a lot of retooling on the spot. And, when you're trying to do, whether it's assessments, quizzes, conferencing, it does have impact. So that's something, again, we've appreciated the teachers' flexibility in that. And we just felt like flexibility, as hard as it is and as exhausting as it can be, is what's going to get us all through this period.
So what might we see as next steps at your meeting? And that, you've already met, you're going to meet again, just in terms of this exploration of perhaps extending the day. Obviously, it's not yet time to bring people back for more in-person time, given the numbers. But, how will we sort of assess that and when it's right to do that?
So I guess my hope is that we can come back in the next 1 or 2 meetings with some updates on those conversations.
Okay.
And again, I think, there may be I think the phasing back to full, more students back in is definitely the longer term conversation.
Right.
Hopefully we'll be able to find some tweaks on, better use of time or potential, around the length of the day. Hopefully that conversation can resolve sooner. I don't want to make any promises because we haven't had the conversation. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but that I expect that we should be able to come back in the next meeting or 2 with some clear follow-up for you.
How much discretion will we have and how much will the governor's office dictate?
My impression is he doesn't want to dictate a whole lot because he's finding every way to push the decisions back onto us. Even with the originally, I don't know if you remember way back when we first reopened, I think he'd said if a region was below 5%, then schools could open, but once it got above 9%, then they would have to shift to fully remote. Nobody even knows if that rule still applies. I asked that question of the health department and superintendents just this week, and everybody just kind of shrugged their shoulders. I think the zone strategy has kind of overtaken that rule, and the zone strategy clearly is a way to provide opportunities for schools to stay open. So, even in some comments that the governor made this week, he pushed it back on local control and local school districts to make those decisions. So.
And Dr. Champ, on that topic, I have completely lost track of what we are. Are we orange? Are we nothing?
We're not yet.
We're nothing. Okay.
He keeps raising the number, right? I thought this week he raised it to like 9% or something.
Yeah. They keep adding more metrics. I think they're trying to get more nuanced. So I'll give some credit on that side to be more nuanced in the metrics. But by the same token, it's clear that the effort is to not have to shut schools down.
So on that basis, we are fully intending to open on Monday and be back to a true hybrid schedule for all schools. And
yes. Okay. Yes, that's the intention. And that's why, again, it's so important that parents communicate with the principals about any active cases that they're dealing with of their students at home. And again, Julia's coordinating with staff so that we can assess the landscape. So far, so good. That's the good news. But we will continue to assess that certainly through the week. Of course, we continue to assess over the weekend as well. And I hope that we do not start the year in a shifting back and forth. Our hope was to start the year solid and consistent. So if everyone does their part, hopefully we can get a good, nice, stable start to the school year.
And I wanted to also thank Julia for the email that reiterated all the travel guidelines and what people are supposed to be doing if they were to have traveled over the break and all of that. And I think it's very helpful because time goes by and we all forget and we think that we're not really doing anything, but in fact, we're out going to the grocery store and doing things like that. So it's a great reminder, and I hope that everybody in the community takes that to heart.
Thanks. Okay, well, that concludes my report for the night.
Okay, great. So this brings us to 4.2, which is Board of Education committee reports. We met just before the break. I don't believe we had any committee meetings, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I had a meeting.
Oh, Benny, you were hard at work. Hard to make assumptions.
I'm going to steal a little of Jim's thunder because he's going to be discussing this in a little while regarding our audit committee meeting, which took place on December 22nd. The primary purpose of the meeting was, one, to meet all the new members of the committee, which the actual size of the committee doubled from last year, which is very nice to see, and to discuss the results of our internal auditors' agreed upon procedures audit relating to a review of two areas within the school. One is employee benefits. The other one is information technology operations, which I believe it's been at least 5 years since those two topics have been discussed. Jim could comment on that now or later on, but I believe that's the case. So with respect to the benefits review, a sample of about 55 individuals, employees, 50 employees that are presently in the school district and 5 retired employees were reviewed. And of those 55, there was one discrepancy that was found by the auditors. With respect to the audit of the IT group, what they did was they actually took a review going back the last 5 years of all employees that have access to all of our networks and so on and so forth. And they did find quite a few that did still have, ex-employees that did still have access. So they're going to investigate each one of those and come back and give an explanation as to why that is. I think the reality is that over the last 5 years, our IT group has gone through many, many changes in terms of headcount, leadership, so on and so forth. And actually, one would argue with everything going on in IT that we are understaffed. So the reality of that is that, things do happen. Thankfully, nothing serious has come about of that, but they will investigate and report back their findings. So based upon the audits of the district, we are required to actually put together a corrective action plan. This corrective action plan will address these 2 points. It is required at the state level within 90 days of the audit. And actually, what's new with the corrective action plans now is we actually have to put implementation dates on the plan itself. So Jim has put those down. We are ready to go. And I believe Jim will be asking for the approval of the board tonight of this corrective action plan. And that's all I got.
Thank you so much. Okay, 4.3 is Assistant Superintendent's update on authentic learning. Dr. Garcia.
Yes, I don't have much more to state. I know I shared a lot of the information already as part of Cheryl's report. Just know that I know the high school is also thinking and deliberating and talking about midterm exams and whether that's something that's appropriate for this year. And I know that Mark Berkowitz and his team will be coming with some information for parents shortly with more specifics about what that will look like or not look like. And I know that's coming up this month, but it is something that we're just making sure that we make the right decision on.
Thank you. 4.4 is Assistant Superintendent's update on the whole child. Ms. Chung.
Thank you. So just to refer back to the email that Eileen just mentioned, I want to make sure that everyone is aware that the New York State did adopt the 10-day quarantine period versus the 14 that we were using prior to. They are being more consistent with the CDC recommendations, but they did not adopt the 7-day quarantine period with the option to test. So I want to make sure that parents understand that, because we still do only have the shortening of the 14 to 10 days and not the other portion of what the CDC had recommended. The other part of my report today is I believe there was a question regarding at-risk students, specifically at the high school, and it was a question that was raised by the board members. And so we gathered some information from Mr. Berkowitz, our high school principal. And I wanted to just share out some of the things that he had shared with us, which is, we've been talking about MTSS for the last couple of years, and we've done a lot of work at every school in terms of really working on, the strategies and the different approaches to how to support kids prior to getting classified for special education, because we want to make sure that anybody who does get brought up and get referred to special education services, we want to make sure we're providing all the interventions prior to, and we want to make sure that we're identifying those students. So specifically to the high school MTSS core team, they meet every other week. The core team actually includes the director of school counseling, Jean Farrell, secondary supervisor of special education, Greg Lau, assistant principal, Beth Antonelli, social worker, Kristen Quintano, and school psychologist, Dr. Janine Hergenrother. So they're the main team that meets every other week, and students are identified based on academic and or behavioral needs in collaboration with the student's teachers and the counselor. And so any concern about a student gets brought up to the MTSS core team. And so when they meet, different counselors will bring up the students that they're concerned about. Some of the work that has already taken place, one of the questions, I think, the question from the board member included, what's going on with supporting our bridge students. So, one of the things that they've done is they've been really looking at students in that program who have been academically at risk, and they've been reaching out to the student and to the family to see if it would be, best for them, for the student to possibly increase their in-person attendance. So that's one of the things that they've been working on. The high school has also launched the Academy Plus program after school for students who are academically at risk and economically qualified, in alignment with the guidelines created by Pelham Civics, because it's the civics that supports this program after school. Our social workers, Kellyanne Lonergan and Kristen Quintano, are also running different types of support groups with a range of different types of targeted needs. And so, we have different grade level groups, for instance. There's also an academic skills building initiative that is being developed with the emphasis for our grade 9, because we know that the transition from 8 to 9 can be difficult, especially this year with the whole cohorted in-person program. I know that some of the 9th graders are having a little more difficult time than they would be typically. And of course, there's also referrals that are made to the counselors, by the counselors to work with a social worker or our school psychologist for individual counseling when it's appropriate. I really do want to give a shout out and thank the high school MTSS core team members, the team members that I've mentioned before, because they really have taken this work that the MTSS team has been doing to the next level this year, really thinking outside the box and developing a really wide range of strategies to support the students. The question that came about, I think, also included some questions about our seniors. And, obviously, every single year they pay extra close attention for our seniors, because we want to make sure that we're supporting them through, throughout the entire year to get them to where they need to go and really support them. So they're keeping a really close eye on their academics and their attendance data. And there actually is an extension of the MTSS team. And so there's actually a separate attendance team, and it's led by Beth Antonelli and Kristen Quintano. And they're meeting weekly to really review attendance data to identify students who have missed 5 or more classes in the prior 10 days. So they're reviewing these students of concern, connecting with their counselors to get more information, and they're having follow-ups with different types of intervention. And the interventions could be, something like a family meeting. It could be referrals for wraparound community services. It could be referral for counseling in school, connecting with one of the teaching assistants or monitors who have been available to meet with students virtually to offer one-to-one homework help and helping students to get to class on virtual days, because some of our students that are not struggling as much in person, but are struggling on virtual days to get to class, we've been utilizing our teaching assistants and monitors to support those students. Let's see. I think that kind of covers, with some examples, what the high school MTSS team has been doing to support our kids. Does anyone have any questions? It looks like Sue.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was my question to Dr. Champ yesterday. And while I was confident that there were a lot of things being done, I think it's really helpful to hear across the spectrum, and particularly in regards to anyone who might be at risk for not graduating, regardless of whatever program they might be in. So thank you. That was exactly what I was looking for.
Julia, I had a question. Thank you as well. It was a lot of information and very helpful. The groups that the civics are running, as well as the support groups that the school is running, are those all being held virtually?
Yes, I believe so. But let me check on that. I'm pretty sure they are being held virtually. But I will get back.
I think so as well, but confirm would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Julia, just hearing you speak, I'm so thankful that we have, over the last couple of years, meaning you, and all the administrators and teachers, put in all the time to streamlining the MTSS program. And, just that's in place is so critical right now, as we have students, sometimes in person, sometimes not, sometimes never coming into our buildings, up against so many different social emotional odds, and academically challenged in ways we would have never foreseen before. It's really perfect that we have this really efficient system in place and well-trained team. So
Yeah, they've done a really great job putting a system in place. So a big shout out to our team members at all levels, actually, not just the high school. May I just add one last thing
Sure.
to my report, which is I know we haven't been in school for a couple of weeks, and so we have stopped really checking for symptoms, possibly taking temperature. I want to just remind parents, starting Monday when you're coming back in person, remember to do your app or fill out a piece of paper to let us know that your child is healthy and ready to learn and come into school.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So item 4.5 is Assistant Superintendent's update on finance and facilities, Mr. Ricky.
Hi, good evening and Happy New Year. If you hear me okay, or if you're having trouble with new earphones, please just raise your hand so I know. Dr. Champ and Vinny took care of most of my update for today, so hopefully I'll be pretty quick. This evening, we're going to ask the board to approve the award for the culvert at Glover Field. If you look at the backup, you can see we had a number of bidders, which was terrific. We had one outstanding bid, which is all you really need. For the low bid was $90,000. The estimate for the project was $200,000. The recommended vendor is Peter J. Landy Incorporated. If you may recall, they did the work in the outdoor classroom at Simonwood, did really great work, a good contractor. So we feel pretty fortunate to have this contractor for this work. With the awarding of the bid by the Board of Ed, they're looking to get started as soon as possible. So that's terrific. We're also working along on Hutchinson. As you can see, when you go by, the brick is going up and they're getting ready to put doors in. I'd like to see if we could set up another time for the Board of Ed to come and walk through the building. So when you have a moment, if you will, you could send me your available times, and we're trying to put together some available times with Frank Arturi, so he knows what we're looking to do. Next month, there are going to be some change orders for Hutchinson that we'll be bringing forward to the board, relatively large in the $300,000 range for the kitchen equipment items that we've talked about before. I know that was brought up at one of the last meetings when there was a summary of the last bond steering meeting, and also for the sound panels. So they're heftier ones than we're used to seeing, but again, those are ones that we held back on so that we knew we could bring them forward when we felt we had a clear financial path, and it's great that we're able to do this. We're working on the kickoff for Prospect, as Dr. Champ mentioned. We also walked the site with the building principal to kind of give everyone an understanding of what the site's going to look like, what's going to be inbounds, out of bounds, to make sure we want to be good neighbors to everybody around us as well. Tonight, we're going to ask the board to approve new tuition rates. This is something that we do every year, and we base our tuition rates based on a formula called the Seneca Falls formula. It's based on a New York State ed ruling from many, many years ago. It's pretty common amongst districts. But again, this is something that we update every year as we go through this. And then we're working on our budget submissions. Always a great time of the year for us, but we're also waiting on CPI. So we should have that shortly as we work through our tax cap. And then one thing to be mindful of is, as you recall, we borrowed all of our money for the capital project. So this year there's certainly going to be a larger bond or capital exclusion part of the tax cap, and we're going to use some of our debt service fund to help get us taper us up to that level of debt service. And we're going to spend plenty of time talking about it. And once we get that final CPI number, I'll be sure to share that with the board, and we'll put it out there for everybody. Also asking the board to approve the corrective action plan that Vinny talked about in related to our internal audit. This will also go on our district webpage with all of our other agreed upon procedures, audits, and capital action and corrective action plans. And we're going to meet again in the February timeframe to work on our next year's plan, with the other audit categories that we're going to talk about, and we're working on our schedule for other RFPs for claims auditor and internal auditor that will be working through the audit committee this year. I'll keep it short. Said I'd keep it short. I think I did. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So this brings us to your section 5, financial reports and motions. I'd like to take a consent at 5.1 through 5.6. Do I have a motion? Thank you, John. Second.
Second.
Thanks, Benny. Any questions or comments? As I said, Jim went through all this, so all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, section 6 is policy monitoring and governance. 6.1 is policy 5670, which is the adoption of records management.
Hi. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm here now. Can you hear me and see me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so sorry, the first policy is 5670 records management. It's a second reading. We had talked about giving the third reading. Nothing has changed here. It's talked about how we handle retention and disposition of records mostly, and we were already handling things this way, even though this is a new policy in particular. So any questions for that? Okay, so I do recommend we waive the third reading and go ahead with this one.
Okay, do I have a motion to waive the third reading of policy 5670 records management?
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, thanks, John. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? So now I'd like to make a motion to adopt policy 5670 records management. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Julia?
Second.
Thanks. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, this brings us to 6.2, which is policy 5676, privacy and security for student data and teacher and principal data. This is our second reading.
Right, so this, again, nothing has changed on this policy. A lot of definitions of what relates to student data and privacy issues, which are obviously all the every year that data becomes more electronic. One thing just I wanted to mention that I believe got mentioned last time also is that the policy identifies who our data protection officer is going to be. That person oversees it. And in our case, it's going to be the director of technology, who is John Savalos. So that was the only thing I wanted to make sure everybody knew. Any questions?
Does everybody mind muting if they're not speaking? Thank you. Any questions? Okay, so we're going to stick with the second reading.
Yeah, we'll go to this is the second reading. We're planning to go to the third.
Okay. So 6.3 is policy 3420, which is non-discrimination and anti-harassment in the district. This is a second reading.
Right. So this is also a new policy. It's an overall statement of our commitment to these ideals, and it provides a foundation for all policies going forward in this area and similar policies. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. When is your next policy meeting, Eileen?
Actually, I had a note to let Pauline know that I don't have anything on my calendar. I think that it's either just me or I don't think that we necessarily planned into 2021. So we could probably use a meeting in January.
Great. Okay. Section 7, superintendent's personnel recommendations. I'd like to take a consent of 7.1 and 7.2. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Vinny and John. Any questions or comments or anything to add? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 8 is people personnel services. 8.1 is motion to approve Schedule D. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Sue. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Jess. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 9 is new business. Do you have any new business? Okay. Section 10 is communications and comments from the public, which I do not have. So Section 11, Eileen, adjournment of the meeting.
Just before she does, I meant to,
Oh,
you zoomed right past personnel so quick. I just wanted to highlight in there an important retirement. Ginny Mangiello, the secretary at Colonial, has given her resignation for the purposes of retirement. And I didn't want that to slide by without just special note. Ginny's been a devoted district employee and she's raised many generations of parents and children. And she's definitely going to leave with a lot of institutional knowledge. So leaving a huge gap because if you recall, we'll be starting the process to replace, was Tanya Wilson. Susan Gilbert's been filling in for this year, but we'll be filling that position and will now be filling the position for the secretary to the principal at the same time. So I just want to wish Ginny well, and we're definitely going to miss her kind, caring ways and her institutional knowledge. And I just want to wish her the best. So.
She's definitely a big part of the heartbeat of Colonial School.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, Eileen?
Madam President, would you entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Do I have a second? Don't all raise your hands at once. Leah, I think was the first. Dawn, everybody all at once. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, everybody. See you in a couple weeks. Have a good night.
Great.
Good
night.
Thanks so
Good night.
much. Thank you.